Okay, so Genesis chapter 24. Genesis and chapter 24. I got to tell Emily today that she was going to learn about the woman where she gets her middle name from, Rebecca. So she was all excited about that. It's good. Why don't we... This is a really long chapter. This is the longest narrative, single narrative in all the patriarchs. So, it's a big section. There's a lot to read. For that reason, we will not do what we usually do, and that is read the entire text at the beginning and then also work through it. It would be a lot. The text itself, as it's written, is also quite repetitive. And so I really don't want to do that. So I'd like to go ahead and pray, ask for the Lord's help in all of this, and then begin to share what I've prepared. So let's do that. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this chance to come together, to gather together under the banner of Christ and give ourselves to your word and give our attention to what you've spoken to us and preserved for us. I pray that it would open up to us and we would learn new things. We would be struck with old truths in fresh ways and be helped by the things that we hear today. Our trust, our confidence in all this, of course, is with you and in your word and the power of your Spirit. So we ask for your help. In the name of Christ, amen. Well, these narratives in Genesis about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are full of details that often we either don't understand or perhaps we don't notice. Very often that causes us to miss the point of the story. We lose the lessons that are here for us, that are put here for us specifically. These things happen to them as examples to us. They weren't only examples, but they are examples. And so one of the things we want to do as we read through here is find examples. We also want to not just look for examples of things to do and ways to act, but also to see what God is doing and take note of Him and what we might learn about Him and how we might trust Him more. That's my intention. Far too often, though, we read these stories just kind of seeking to understand the bare facts, and that causes us also to miss out on the tensions and the resolutions that Moses wants us to see, and which kind of give us a context and a sense of a resolution we might be looking for. Very often, the lessons to be learned are found there. Today, then, as we consider Genesis 24, we're considering a passage of Scripture that for many is a rather strange passage, even if merely for the fact of the way the marriage happens, right? That Isaac just trusts not only his father to find a bride, but his father's servant to go off and just come back with somebody. It's very shocking, and she just goes, and this is very foreign to us. And so just for that reason alone, this sounds otherworldly. And then not to mention all the whole host of customs and when's the last time you loaded up some camels for a trip? We don't understand most of what's happening here. And so it's just a little bit hard to read it the same way you would read, the novel that was written last year. Because this is another world for us. So there's a lot of barriers maybe. And so a lot of times we just read and if we can just understand, how much water a camel does drink, then we feel like we're really understanding the whole passage. And there's just a lot more to it than that. And so that's my hope, is to make this text understandable for us and obvious and clear and plain, so we never misunderstand it or misread it again. By doing that, hopefully we can benefit from this the way God intends. The first thing I want to start off with is the context of the story. So my first intention is to lay out the broad context of the story or the setting. The first thing I want us to consider is just the very beginning and the very ending of the story. So we're clear about what is happening here, and then we'll widen out a little bit. But think about just the main thrust of the account. Look at Genesis chapter 24 and verse 1. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Verse 2, and Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife for my son Isaac. So this is how it begins. Abraham is old, and he's looking for a wife for his son, and he tells the servant, promise me you won't take a woman from here, but you'll go to my homeland. And then let's look at the very end. Genesis 24, verse 67. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And we might say, mission accomplished, right? He got his bride. That's the whole thing. Isaac got the bride. He didn't have a bride. He needed a bride. He got a bride. That's the main thrust. Now, the text could have just told us that and skipped this whole story, but there's something about how it happened and the way that it happened that is a benefit to us. I mean, when it talks about Esau, it just says he just married these other women and it made Jacob's life miserable. So not Jacob's life, Isaac's life miserable, and Rebekah. It doesn't tell us all these details and the conversations that happened and this kind of thing. It's not necessary. There's nothing for us in that, but there is something for us here. And so we want to ask, what? Now, what else about the context? What else can we say? There's some tensions here. You may remember Abraham has received many promises from God already, which were clear and repeated throughout his life. They've shaped his entire life since they've been given. We've been going over those as we've considered the life of Abraham, how central and pivotal these promises were and the fulfillment of those promises. But in basic terms, two things I want to highlight is God promised, one, to make him a great nation, and two, to bless him in all things. There are other more significant things he was promised, but those are two things he was promised early. They're very basic, things you can touch and handle. These are things that he should experience in his own life. It seemed to him, right? Again, there are other promises, bigger promises, such as the promise to bring true blessing to all the nations of the earth through a child who would eventually come through his descendants, or that his descendants would be given the land of Canaan as an inheritance, as a possession in several hundred years. Those are big. But for now, just these two promises. Consider first that he would be blessed by God, and second, that he would be made a great nation. So just turn with me back to Genesis chapter 12 and see that, again, how basic these things were. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, this is at the very beginning, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. So that's fundamentally, Abraham, leave everything you know, come venture out on me, follow me, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you are a blessing. So these things have been promised. This loomed large in Abraham's thinking. Let's go to Genesis 15. After these things, namely Abraham had won a great military victory, but had put himself at real risk for revenge. After these things, Genesis 15:1, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, and your reward shall be very great. Right? Don't fear. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continued childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. I don't have a descendant. And of course, then Genesis 16, we realize that in frustration of that, of not having a descendant, they turn and Sarah gives Abram her servant as a wife substitute, which was a common practice at the time, and that wasn't right. And then God promised a son, and he was given a son between he and Sarah, namely Isaac. He's called to sacrifice that son later and to trust God that God would do this, would in fact, through Isaac, his descendants would be named and his blessing would pass. This whole thing of having a son and this being made a great nation loomed large for Abraham. And we open up then in Genesis 24 and we read these words. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. So he's got the blessing. God promised Abraham, I'll make you a great nation and I will bless you. He's got the blessing. But as far as being a great nation, he's got one son. Just one. Who's not married. There's not even a mother in Israel at this time. The last chapter, the mother of Israel passed away. There is no female in the house at all. This is amazing, unless it's a servant, but you got nobody. This is incredible. The great nation with no females. It's like you're scratching your head. Something's wrong. Something's got to give. So, this is something of the plot. The story begins just after Abraham has buried his wife, Sarah. Sarah's dead and gone, and now we're told about Abraham that he is old, well advanced in years. We are also again reminded of what we've seen in Abraham's life so far, that he's been blessed in everything by God. But what about being made a great nation? That part of what God had promised him has yet to be fulfilled, certainly. In the family line, again, as I said, there's not even a family mother. No female in the family. How is he going to become a great nation like that? Well, just prior to the Genesis 23 and the story about Sarah's death, we got some news, or Abraham got some news. You may remember that. He heard in Genesis chapter 22, verse 20, after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah, that's his sister-in-law, also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlap, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Rimah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maachah. Okay, lots of people here. 12 sons born to his brother. Now, Isaac is now 37 years old, without a bride. And he was 37 years old when Sarah died. I have reason to think, because we read later that he was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, that some period of years happen even after Sarah dies before he sends his servant off to the land. So a couple years go by. And so for several years now, there's not been a female in the home. No mother in Israel. And so you can imagine Abraham, he's stewing. He's thinking, is who the Lord sent us here to this land. Who will my son marry? He desperately wants this. My assumption is he's just not finding a woman and a family that seem at all suitable. Whether it be their religious practices or their moral character, whatever it may be, he's not finding there's a woman here to be had for his son. So after a couple years, he's old, well advanced in years. He's been blessed in everything. Whatever he's needed, God has blessed him with. But he doesn't have this one thing. He doesn't have a bride for his son. So he says to his servant, the oldest of his household, and you wonder if it was perhaps Eliezer of Damascus, or who it could have been, this boy who was a servant and is grown now I don't know. It was the oldest of his servants, and this servant, it's the oldest one, has charge of all that he had. That sounds familiar to us if we think about later on in Genesis. Joseph had charge of all that was in Pharaoh's house. So this was a servant that Abraham didn't have to usually worry about all the affairs of his household because he had a faithful servant like this man who was in charge of everything. And God was blessing everything that Abraham possessed. So things weren't going wrong. There weren't problems. He didn't have to reprimand this guy too often. Things were well. And so here he is, and he says to this man, the oldest servant he has, his most trusted servant, right? The one who's in charge of everything. He makes him swear an oath. Put your hand under my thigh. That's a kind of an intimate thing. I mean, I'm glad we can just shake on it, but it's a cultural thing, right? Put your hand here under my thigh and swear to me, right? Put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So this is serious. The first half of the oath is that you will not find a wife for my son from among these people. It's not just I would prefer a wife over there, but don't take a wife from here. Don't find a woman from this place. But rather, what must you do? You will go to my country. That's a long ways off. A few months, probably, to get there. Among whom I dwell. But you go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. So go to my country. Now, he's living in the land that he's been promised, but when he talks about my country, he means my homeland. Go to my country. Go there and take a wife. Nope, it's more specific. And to my kindred. Don't just find my country, the area generally where I'm from, and get a woman from there. Find my family and take a wife from there. Take a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, he's got some realistic problems. Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me, right? Like, what if she won't come? I mean, I can say she should come, but her family may not agree. She may not agree. There are some issues here. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? So maybe she's not willing to come with me. Should I then, in honor of your request to find a bride from there, come back and get him and take him out there? What does Abraham say to him? Verse 6, Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. Don't do that. Think of that. Abraham does not want his son, he does not want to make it easy for his son to abandon the promised land of God and the promises of God and encourage him to go make his life back where they came from. God called them out of that place. He would have sought a wife did probably seek a wife for his son here. He didn't find anyone suitable. And so he's left with, go back there and get a bride, but don't let my son leave to go there. Worse than leaving this land would be what? He says, the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you and shall take a wife for my son from there. But, so Abraham's confident this is going to work out. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine, only you must not take my son back there. So I don't want you to get a bride from here, but more than that, I really don't want you to let him go there. And definitely don't take him there, because God took me out of that place and brought me here and said, this is the place where your offspring will have this land. So there's kind of a hierarchy, right? I definitely don't want a bride from here, but even more than that, I want my son to stay here. So it's kind of like, you might say it this way, Abraham almost views, if Isaac would leave, that would be disobedience. But if he took a wife from among the Canaanites, that would be definitely less than preferable. He would far rather get a wife from his homeland, but he's not willing to have his son leave the land. So there's a hierarchy. Both are very important, but one is more important than the other. All right, let me stop there before we get too much further and just kind of work through some general outlines of the rest of this passage, the rest of this chapter. There are 4 scenes kind of in this story. We've just read the first one. Abraham and his servant in the land of promise, scene 1. Scene 2, out in Mesopotamia, in Haran, in Padan Aram, the servant and Rebekah at the well. Scene 3, they're in Mesopotamia again, between the servant and Rebekah's family. Laban, they're at the family house, and they have this exchange. And the 4th scene, we come back to the land of promise. We have Isaac, Rebekah, and the servant all back in the land and together. So kind of 4 scenes. Abraham and the servant in the promised land talking about this. Then we go to Mesopotamia and we find the servant there at the well, and he finds Rebekah. And then they go from there to Rebekah's family home, where the servant and Laban go back and forth. And then last is Isaac and Rebekah and the servant back in the promised land, and the wedding, the marriage happens, and the union. But there are also kind of 4 main points to the plot, problems to deal with. The first problem we might think of, here's this journey. What would you think the first issue would be? Will he find a woman? Right? Is there someone over there? Now, Moses has already hinted at us that there is someone. He said to us in parentheses in chapter 22, Bethuel, Abraham's nephew, fathered Rebekah. So we know, but the servant doesn't know, and Abraham doesn't know, but we know there's this woman named Rebekah, and she's the one. Will he find a suitable woman? That's really verses 5, when Abraham makes him, when the servant says, well, maybe she wouldn't come. That's from there. Will he find a woman who would be willing to do this? Verse 5 all the way down to verse 27 is this section dealing with this problem. Second problem, will the woman's family permit the servant to take the girl away? That's the next problem. Will they agree? Third problem, and it's the one that was first mentioned by the servant, will the woman be willing to go right away? Fourth problem, will Isaac be willing to marry this woman? Right? Will he embrace her? Will he love her? What will this marriage be like? So 4 issues here. That's kind of the complications as we go through, things that need to be resolved and overcome. Those are all real problems. I mean, when I was in college, every single young man I knew was concerned with, will I find a wife? Will I find a suitable woman? Right? Will she go with me? Will she want to be with me? Right? Then there's all this family issues. Like, let's say you do meet a woman and now it's like, oh, I got to meet her family. Like, how's this going to go? Right? Will we really love one another? Like, these are big, and every person thinks about these things. And these are all real challenges here, and they're heightened by the strange circumstances we find where this guy's traveling and like, you're not even ever going to meet these people. The servant's going to come and he's just going to tell you about this relative that you have, and he's going to ask you to send this woman. It just seems very unlikely that this is going to work out. Very, very unlikely. But we know, of course, the result is God works it out. Like, and this is the wonderful thing. Like, God actually worked this out. Like, this jumbled mess, these complicated circumstances, the impossibility of the request. I mean, you got to think about the servant. He's like, I'm going to swear this oath. And no wonder he's like, okay, so when it doesn't work, what then? Right? It's not like it's an easy task, you know. My assumption is this isn't going to work out. So what then? What's your plan B, Abraham? Because plan A is not looking good. He's a realist. He's not hopeless. He's not godless, but he's a realist. It's not likely to succeed. Which I'll say this then, the theme of the story in its entire point is the providence of God, the goodness of God, the care of God in fulfilling His promises and in providing for His people, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. Like, that's the point. You read through this and you think, look what He did. There was no reason to think that this was going to work out, and God provided it. God blessed him even in this. He blessed him in everything, and there was this one issue that still remained. And in the most unlikely of ways, God came through wonderfully for Isaac. This was incredible. Look what God has done. And so then, what's the application? Well, it's like, well, you should see that, and it should build your confidence, and you should be able to say, when you have some kind of a situation like this, and say, well, God will provide for me too. I can entrust myself to God in these unlikely circumstances. When things don't look like they're going to come to pass, I can say, look, He did it. Look what He did for Isaac. Remember that time when the servant was like, this isn't going to work, it's not going to happen, and then God provided? Look at that. Take courage. You can trust God too. And so that's the whole point of the story. That's the theme. That's the lesson, the so what of the story. But there are all these details. And as we read the details, the kindness of God and the goodness of God and all the ways that He arranged this become more evident and more astounding. And so let's just work through them and begin to see this all the more. Okay, so here we are. Verse 8, but if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. So he goes to Mesopotamia. He goes to the land, Padan Aram. And he goes to the city of Nahor. Of all the towns and places he could have come, he comes to Nahor city, like to the town that he's from. I don't suppose he had any real way of knowing. I mean, they haven't been told what town they were in. Abraham could have told him, well, the last time we were there, it was in such and such a town. It went by this name. I don't know, perhaps. So I don't mean to say that we know that this is a miraculous thing in and of itself right at this point. But it may be. It may be providential. He went to Mesopotamia, which is a whole big region. And he happens to come to the city of Nahor. Now, I do want to mention this as well, because it was a question I had when I first read it, and I didn't pick up this detail until much later. As I got thinking, okay, here's this servant, like, he kind of seems like a fool. I was piling up the unlikelihood that this would ever succeed, and it starts out, this servant, and it just mentions him alone, takes 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. Could you imagine if you were just the average Joe, and you see one guy, and he's got 10 camels lined up behind him, and he's taking them, and they are loaded with wealth. Like, he's never going to make it. And so my first thought was like, well, there's one thing. And then I kept reading. And then I read in verse 59, so they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. So he didn't go alone. He took with him a company of men. So just to point that out, right? It's not alone. It's him and a number of men, no doubt, to protect the treasures and the wealth and to help along the way. There's going to be a lot of work to be done. I mean, 10 camels, that's a lot of camels to take care of. Plus, they're loaded with stuff, and then you got your provisions for the way, and there's a lot here. It's not just a one-day journey. This is a number of weeks, probably at least a month, probably to get there. It's a long way. So he gets to the city of Nahor, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. So he goes out there. The first thing he does, you got thirsty camels. First thing you do, have the camels go out and kneel down outside the city. You don't go in yet. That's interesting too. You'd think you arrive at a town, your first business would be to find lodging and things like this. He's like, we're not really concerned with that yet. Right away, I want to do this. So he takes the camels and they kneel down. They need water. But at the very end, the first thing he says, he gets there. Oh, let's just say culturally. Let's back up a little bit. Culturally, at the time when the young women go out to draw water. So whatever it is you're thinking is going on culturally at this time, understand that in the evening time, when the heat of the sun begins to set, but it's still light out, before it's dangerous, you send these young women, why not the young men? I don't know what they're doing. They're busy with their things. But you send these young women out of the house where they'd been working, out to the well to draw water for the day and for the evening, and to bring it back. Now the pitchers that they used, and there could be various sizes, but it's almost assumed that are these kinds that are generally like a 3-gallon pitcher. So it's like, you take this rope, and take this jar down there, let it get filled up, and you haul it out. So you draw water. What kind of containers are they putting them in? Are they taking that one container and walking it all the way back home and putting it in some bigger tub? Or do they have a cart with a horse or a camel or a donkey or something they're putting water in and spilling half of it, sloshing around on their way home? I don't know what. But typically these would be, you'd go out there, get water, bring it back. You might make 2 or 3 trips and be done for the evening. At 3 gallons apiece, 9 gallons of water doesn't sound like much for us, but, how many times are you going to flush the toilet in a day? It's not a whole lot of water, but it's when water's scarce, it's plenty. So this is what they would do. And so all these young women who are still in their parents' home would go out and get water. So this is the time of evening. He expects that they'll come. And he says immediately, he doesn't just say, let's let the women, a gentleman would say, let's let the women get their water first and then we'll get the water from the well that we need afterwards. He doesn't do that. He's got a mission. He's not just thinking about what would be polite for these women. He begins to pray, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac, and by this shall I know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. So he doesn't know any of these women. How's he going to, so he's been thinking on this journey, how am I going to pick the right one? Well, so what would you say if that's your task? You're going to pick a bride for a dear friend or someone whom you love. What kind of woman will you pick? Well, you might say, well, I hope she's pretty. You're like, well, okay, great. And, well, if I really think about it, I want her to be, a hard worker. I want her to be kind. I want her to be generous. I want her to be willing to give to others. I want her to be a kind of a person. I want her character. Is what my big concern is her character. And so he prays, and he doesn't say, Lord, let her be the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. He says, let her be. This is what I'm asking, God, I don't expect to find this. But if I find it, I will know that you have provided a bride for Isaac. I'll know that you've appointed this one, because this is a lot what I'm asking. So here's what I'm asking, Lord. These women will come out and I'll ask them. I'll say, would you be willing to let me drink some from your jar? Will you put your jar down for me that I might drink? And that's a big ask, because she's out here on a chore for her family. But the woman who's willing to do that, and then without me asking, who also volunteers to draw water for all these camels, and don't forget, and all these men who are here, like, what's their problem? Why can't they get the water? She's willing to do all of this. If there's a woman like that here, I'll know you've answered my prayers. Like this, if I could find a woman like that, I would love for Isaac to have a woman like that. That would be an answer to prayer. And so may it be that there would be a woman in the world like that. And she happens to be at this well at this time when I got here this day, and I'll know this is the one you've appointed. You've ordained it. You've chose ahead of time and set it all up that it would happen. As unlikely as it appeared, you've arranged everything. I'll know that. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. So it's kind of, in his prayer, it's kind of a test for God. Do you really love Abraham? Do you really bless him? You've shown him steadfast love. Right? He says in verse 12, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. And then verse 14, by this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Before he had finished speaking, you might say finished speaking in his heart, it's almost like, and by this shall I, and then he sees, here's Rebekah. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, and he doesn't know this yet, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, that this is Moses telling us, this woman, like not just that he arrived at the city, but Nahor's granddaughter specifically comes out with her water jar. How did she carry it? How did she carry it? What's it say? On her, what does it say? On her shoulder, right? She's got it on her shoulder because they're heavy. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. So it wasn't just that it was this relative. She is beautiful. And more than that, because they would wear clothes accordingly, you could know this. Like now we look at a wedding ring, but you could know this by the garments that these women would wear. She was a maiden. She hadn't been married. She had no husband. She was eligible to be married. This is a woman who was a candidate. She went, what had happened? She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Now you notice the distance there. I don't know how far it is, but it's giving us clues of distance. It's describing that. She went down to, he saw her come out of the city. She went down to the spring, drew water, and came up. So they're not like right next to the spring. She came up. Now, did she come up to him? No, she came up. She's going back to the city. Then the servant ran to meet her. So he's a ways off. And said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. Now it doesn't say upon the ground. She let down her jar upon her hand. So she takes it from her shoulder, full of water, and holds it down like this and allows him to get his drink. She's just not just like, here, you take care of it. She's, here you are, and he's drawing water out of that and drinking. It's quite a thing. I mean, that she's holding the big, heavy water jar while he's drinking. Drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, so that's all done. You know, the whole time he's drinking, he's like, I wonder if she's going to ask. I wonder if she's going to ask. I wonder if she's going to ask. Will she ask? Will she ask? Will she ask? He gets all done with the drink, and she says, I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking. Until they've finished drinking. Now, okay, so I don't know anything about camels. But I guess that's not true, because I'm going to tell you some things about camels, so I do know some things about camels. They've got this big hump, right? And what's in that hump? Well, I don't know what's in that hump. People say water, some people don't say water, right? So they drink water. They drink tons of water, and they go through the desert for days and weeks, and they don't drink anything because they've got all this water stored up. So they've gone on this journey now for weeks. I don't know when the last time they got water was, But they say that if a camel goes like 2 or 3 days without water, they'll drink as much as 25 gallons at a time. 25 gallons. Let's just say 15 gallons. Let's say they're just it's been like a day since they drank. It's sort of like 15 gallons per camel. 10 camels, it's 150 gallons of water. 150 gallons of water. She's got a container that holds probably at most 3, and it's not like a, so Jonas, go to the back in the kitchen and you will find a trash can that holds less than 3 gallons, mostly full of water, and bring it up here. A little illustration for the kids. Quickly, bud. Quickly. Everybody see, is he struggling a little bit? Is he struggling a little bit? This is like a 2.5 gallon trash can, and it's swelling. It is a little bit round anyway, but it's swelling. It's a little heavy. When you kids want to try to grab it, pick it up. So this is less water, and this is like a 3 ounce, 4 ounce, 5 ounce plastic trash can, not a clay jar, right? Ian, Grant, you guys want to try? It's water, so if it does spill, pick stuff up. Let's see what happens. Okay, now take your stone jar that's heavier than that, put it down in the well, let it get full of water, pull it up with a rope, right? Get the jar, unhook it from whatever, take it up the hillside, put it in a trough or something. I don't know. Are we going to individually let the camels drink out of the thing and go back down, all the slobber and junk and everything? I don't know what we're doing. If there's a trough there maybe that you just keep filling up, and every time you go up there it's still empty, and you do it until they stop drinking. But that's at least 50 trips. And that doesn't include the men or the one that she got for him, and then she's still got to get home and provide for her family. This is a lot of work. It's a big ask. I don't know a teenage girl who would do this. Let me say that. And he didn't either. But God did, right? Rebecca did. She's amazing. She's diligent. She's kind. She went out. How long does it take to do this? Is it an hour? 2 hours? I don't know. I mean, at trip like 6, or like trip like 16, is she looking at these servants from the servants, and thinking, "You guys comfortable?" I mean, she didn't seem to complain, but what's their problem? And they're all just letting her do it. But you might imagine maybe one of them said, "No, don't let her do that. I'll do it." And the servant, Abraham's servant, saying, "No, wait, see what she does. As I've asked the Lord about this. Don't interfere. Let's see if she'll finish the job." And she did. Like, it wasn't just that they were being rude. He'd asked God specifically for this. And if God came through, if there was a woman who was willing to do this, in spite of all the reasons she had not to, and however unlikely it might be that you'd ever find a woman willing to do this, and he would know this was the one. He doesn't know her name yet. Doesn't know her family. Doesn't know if he's come to the right town. He's in Mesopotamia. There he is. And she does it. So she quickly verse 20, she quickly emptied her jar into the trough. So it was the trough, there it is, it tells us. And ran again to the well to drink water. She runs, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. Right? So will she finish the task? Will she do it? Verse 22, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels. So he gets these things, he's ready, and he stops and thinks, "Oh, wait a minute, I need to ask. I'm pretty sure if there's a woman like this, that God has arranged this, and this is the one. But let me just ask one more question. Please tell me whose daughter you are. There's the room in your father's house for us to spend the night. And she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And it's like knock me over with a feather, this is crazy. Can't believe it. This is the woman that's there. And she added, we have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night. Like after all she's given him, she's like, yeah, we've got whatever you need. Straw and fodder. We can support you. We can feed your camels and your men and everything you need. And we have room to spend the night. The man bowed his head and what? What was his first response? And worshiped the Lord. The God of he says, and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. Right? God was continuing to make good on what he promised Abraham he would do. And look at his steadfast love. He didn't just provide a wife, he provided such a wife. A woman of this character. And she's beautiful. Like bonus points, right? That's the other risk everybody has. Like, well, if I just say I'll let God choose, then, I'm going to get some guy who's just disgusting or some woman who, I don't even want to be in the same room as her. That's not what happened. She was beautiful. And this is the way every man I know who gets to that place where they say, Lord, you choose the woman. That man is happy with that woman. He is. This is the way it is. Well, so here it is. And he's worshiping the Lord. You could imagine, he puts this ring on her and these bracelets on her. And she hears him just, he just worships God. And then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out toward the man to the spring as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the words of Rebekah his sister. Thus the man spoke to me. He went to the man. We learn about Laban later. Laban's kind of a greedy fellow. He's changing Jacob's wages on him all the time and all this. And you kind of get a hint of that here. She had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out toward the man to the spring as soon as he saw the ring and bracelets on his sister's arms. These rings and bracelets, they meant something. They meant something culturally, but not everybody could afford the rings and the bracelets and all this stuff. And so he sees, this is a wealthy man, and he runs, and he goes out there. And you might say, well, I'm kind of reading between the lines, and I kind of am, but this is what Laban is like. We know this is what Laban is. And so I don't think it's wrong to read it that way. Moses isn't making a big point of it, but it's there. When does he go out there? When he sees the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms. And then he hears about the words of Rebekah, his sister. Thus the man spoke to me. He goes out to the man. And behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. The servant was. And he said, come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why is he using, we know Laban's an idolater at this time. Why is he, and so was Abraham, all of Abraham's family. Why is he saying blessed of the Lord? Because he heard the way that the servant immediately, when he found out who she was, immediately began to worship God and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who hasn't forsaken his steadfast love. So he comes out and says, well, come on in, blessed of Yahweh. Blessed of the Lord, come. Why do you stand outside? For I've prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water, more water. Where did the water come from? Faithful Rebekah. Water now to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Right? There it is again. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, I've got business to handle right now. I'm on a mission. He says what? I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. And Laban said, speak on. Tell me, what's the news? So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. Now just remember, they know who Abraham is. Abraham is their relative, and they know that. I'm his servant, the Lord has blessed him. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants, like myself and the men you see, and female servants, camels, as you see, and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old. Well, they were old when they left. How much older did they get, right? Well, they got a lot older. When she was old, and to him, to that son, he has given all that he has. And my master made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan, and take a wife for my son. Well, then I said to my master, well, perhaps the woman will not follow me. But he said to me, the Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you, and will prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan. And if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. So I came today to the spring and said, so he's reporting all this, I said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if you now are prospering the way that I go, right? If you might say, if it's true that what Abraham said, that you did send an angel out ahead of time to prepare the way for me, to work it all out, if that's really the case, if Abraham was right in placing his confidence in you, if you are favorable to him, if you are prospering the way that I go, behold, look, here I am. I'm standing right here by this spring of water. Let the virgin who comes out to draw water, to whom I shall say, please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who then will say to me, drink, and I will draw for your camels also, let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. And then he's still telling the story, and before I had even finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew water. And I said to her, please let me drink. And she quickly let down the jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will give your camels drink also. And so I drank, and she gave the camels drink also. And then I asked her, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put a ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and then I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, so God has already done it. God has shown steadfast love and faithfulness to my master. Now it's your turn. Will you show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master? If you will do this, tell me. And if not, then tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or the left. Then Laban, her brother, and Bethuel, her father, answered and said, the thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord had spoken. Put yourself in Laban and Bethuel's place here. I mean, they had heard, maybe they knew, but they had sounds like they had heard. They would not have met Abraham, but they had heard about this man, Abram, who just left everything. I mean, they were all living down in Ur of the Chaldeans, and God had spoken to Abraham, and as a family, they kind of came out of there and went part way, and they settled back in where they had been from originally. And then he, after his father died, he went on and left everything. You don't really hear anything more about him. And then you get word one day, this servant shows up with all these camels, and he says, hey, with this story. And it's like, wow, Abraham wasn't imagining things. Like God really is doing for him all that he said he would do. And so what do they say? Well, this thing is from the Lord. If what you've said is true, and this is all the things you prayed and the way this has happened, this is of God. This is from God. The God that's blessing Abraham, He's doing this too. Who are we to stand in His way? Like, we're not going to go start fighting against the gods, like when they've made their will known this clear. That these aren't worshipers of God, right? These people have their own gods and their own idols and stuff, but here's a God, a real God who's come up, and Abraham is his guy, and he has obviously worked this situation out to provide this woman for this man, and they're not going to stand in his way. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. So they're willing to let him go, which is quite remarkable, but they do it. When Abraham's servant heard their words, another problem you can check off, solved by God, right? He bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, and the servant brought out, what does he do? He brought out jewelry of silver and of gold and garments, you might say, and costly garments, and gave them to Rebekah. Right? He dresses her like a queen. These riches were for her. And what else were they for? And he also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. Right? Jewelry and trinkets and gifts. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days, and after that she may go." Uh-oh. They're kind of, it's one thing to say, this is obviously of God, and then you go and you sleep on it, and you think, I don't know. Like, we don't know them at all. Does this seem like a good idea? We haven't really talked to her about it too much. I mean, honestly, we heard the report, and, she told us what happened, and then we heard the report from him in more detail, but I don't know. Let her stay here for a while. Give us 10 days. Give us some time. After that, maybe she can go. But he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." Right? I mean, everything I've done, gotten straight way, has just been blessing and providing. It's not like he was there for 10 days and finally found a woman who met the test. The first woman he asks. He's still praying the prayer. He sees her and he's like, okay, I'm going to ask her. And he asks her, success. And it's, who are you? It's the woman. Do you have a place for us to stay? Yes, we have a place. We got everything you need. Come. And he goes. He tells the story. He says, they said, here's your food. Eat. He says, wait, I'm not going to eat first. I've got business to take care of. He shares. They agree. Then they eat and they drink. After all this had happened, they eat and drink and sleep. He wakes up. He says, hey, we're leaving. And they say, wait 10 days. He didn't want to wait. This has been direct. Let me go. There's no reason to delay. God has provided. He's set it all up perfectly. We don't need to wait. Let's leave. Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away, that I may go to my master. And they said, let us call the young woman and ask her. Right? This was among their own fears, there was the fear for her, like, how does Rebekah really feel about this? Like, which is kind of shocking for us, because we would think, well, wouldn't she be the first one? But not in this culture. This is the culture of arranged marriages. And it's been arranged. But before they send her off, just in less than 24 hours from when she met this guy to a foreign land, they say, well, let's at least ask her. Like, this is kind of soon. So they ask. Let us call the young woman and ask her. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. So she goes. She's willing to go. Another, check it off. She's willing to come. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, which is, for Laban, it was his sister, but it's another way of talking about just his kindred. Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Very curious statement. They pronounce a blessing, a lyrical blessing. Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s. So they pray that she would have she'd be the mother of thousands of 10,000s, right? Not that she would literally have 10,000 children. No one would wish that on any woman. But that she would be a matriarch, right? She would be a woman who has vast descendants. Many children of her own, and a great lineage. And then more than that, they pray, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Singular, again. It's a quote, from earlier in Genesis 22. The angel. They had no way to know that, but this is what they said. And may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. I would just mark that down as another way God's in this whole thing. Like you see, what they say is like they're pronouncing the greatest blessing that has been given so far by God is that there was going to come a descendant who would overcome his own enemies, would rule them, and would bring blessing to the nations. And this is the thing that they find coming off their lips. And may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. They're quoting the angel from the most precious promise. It just seems like, it's kind of like one of those coincidental things you look at and say, God's put his stamp on this here in yet another way. Then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. So now he's on foot. The servant's on foot all the way back to the promised land. And she's riding on the camels. And her young women are riding on the camels, generally most all the way. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had returned from Beer Laharoi and was dwelling in the Negev. So Isaac he left for a little time. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. So he goes out there, right? It's evening time, about the time young women go to draw water, right? It's kind of the same time. Evening time. He goes out to the field. To do what? It says to meditate, to think, to ponder. When's that guy getting back? Who's she going to be? What's she going to look like? How tall is she? Right? He's meditating. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, it is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. Right? She's going to present herself to her husband. So what does she do? She covers herself in this very kind of a ceremonial sort of way. She took her veil and covered herself, and the servant then told Isaac all the things that he had done. Now, thankfully, for us reading, we don't have another report from him, where we get it repeated a third time, right? But it's there. So he reports all this to Isaac. Now the pressure's on Isaac, like you kind of have to say, okay, I'll marry her. Like you have to. You don't have, imagine if he said, no. I'm like, what are you doing? He's got to, he doesn't know, she's covered up, he doesn't know anything about her, she came. What he knows is about her character. That's what he knows. He knows the servant's report. And the willingness of her family, that because it was God who arranged it, they said, go. And she was willing to come. And look at all that she was willing to do as a servant already. So what does Isaac do? Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. He loved her. So, or thus, in this way, Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. That's kind of an odd statement. Was comforted after his mother's death. You mean like his mom died and he's like, oh, my mom. And he's just missing his mom, and then he finally gets a bride and he's like, okay, I guess it's all right. It's kind of strange. It's a strange way to talk. I think the idea is how does the bride comfort him after his mother's death, like 3 years later. It's an odd thing. I got to believe the way it happens is he's like Abraham. Once his mom dies, it's like he'd thought about who he might marry before, but now she's gone. And he's the child. And there's no bride. And who's it going to be? And there's not a woman around. And he's dealing with this wrestling and afraid the same way Abraham was. And this is like the first huge lesson for Isaac about the way God will provide for him. He's comforted in this way. How did it happen? It was totally out of his hands. His dad sent his servant out on literally mission impossible. And then he finds out the servant made it even more hard. It was like, what do you mean you said that to God? Why would you ask God to find a woman like that? Like nobody's going to... You mean there is a woman like that and this is her? I'll take her. Thank you. Like it's wonderful. So it's just it's a shock in every way. Look how God provided. It's lesson number 1 for Isaac about the way the Lord will undertake for him, provide for him, the way the Lord's not going to just, it wasn't like, well, I said these things to Abraham, but who are you? You're Isaac. No, like you too. I promised Abraham this is what will happen, and I'm going to show him steadfast love, and I'm going to continue to carry out all the things I promised. And I will make you promises. And he does later. Specifically, I will talk to you. I will deal with you personally, individually. It's not just the stories about what happened to your father that you got to live on and trust. I'm in your life, and I'm going to provide for you here and now. Even a bride. I'm going to comfort you. You're concerned, you're worried. Here's a massive amount of comfort. Look at this woman I've prepared for you. I've appointed her. And nothing's going to stand in the way of that. And here she came. And he loved her. And so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. I mean, imagine if they got married, and Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and they were at odds for years, and they hated one another. You'd think, what happened? That would be no comfort. But because it was she was such a blessing to him, they can say, and so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Like she was a source of comfort. She was an actual blessing to him. God brought her to him, to the field. It's amazing. What a thing. So, we could read this account, and we could find all kinds of examples, right? Wouldn't be wrong to do that. The servant, here's a man of prayer and thanksgiving. He's a realist, but he's godly. And he looks to God to provide. He doesn't want to be duped, right? He's there like, I want to succeed. I'm liable to just settle for some gal. Lord, if I don't know what woman, I do know this. If I have one concern, it's that it would be a godly woman. That I could not imagine, or a woman of character, a kind woman. If I could not imagine a woman doing this. Let's say this happens. If that happens, then I know that you're in this. It happens. God provides. We see every time when he sees the Lord providing, he worships God and gives thanks to God. Not just privately, but even in front of other people. He just thanks the Lord because it's the Lord's due. There's an example for us. I mean, he's an example in those ways. How about the servant looking to God in his uncertainty, following the clear guidance of the Lord? Those things he's an example to us. The priorities he sets for a bride. Young men, pay attention, right? What kind of woman should you pursue? This kind of woman, a woman of character, right? So he's an example. What about Abraham? He's an example, seeking to find a wife for his son who would not lead him far from God, like all these Canaanite women would. Who would respond in faith and come because God was with Abraham. And she did. What a thing. So Abraham can be an example. Read about Rebekah as a model of kindness and of helping strangers, of diligence, of a willingness to follow God. Read about Isaac, who loved and cherished his wife. All of these people can be an example to us in their own way in this story. But the point is not a manual for finding a bride. There are some examples of that. I mean, I don't think any of the young men in this church want their parents to say, this is the way in which we will find you a bride. Specifically. Like It's not a manual for that. And I don't want my daughter running off because some guy said some things. I'm a little more concerned than that. Maybe that's more of a judgment on me. Maybe Laban's more righteous than I am. I don't know, but I'm just being honest with you. This isn't a manual for that. There are ways that these people can be examples for us in this story, and we should follow their example when we can. We should look for their example. But the point of the story isn't just to read about what happened and find an example on that level. The point is, look what God has done. Look at the way God cared for Isaac and showed steadfast love to Abraham. And it even involved the servant in this whole thing. And everyone was full of joy and gladness. Isaac was comforted. He loved her. What a thing. This is wonderful. So I say the application then is that we also can entrust ourselves to the good care and the good plan of God for us, right? That's the application. And I thought I would just read quickly 3 texts and close with this. You know these texts, most all of you. The first one is famously in Romans chapter 8. And verse 28. Think of your example here for this statement being, you say, well, when does that ever happen? I'm going to read something, you might say, well, when does that ever happen? And just say, well, it happened for Isaac with Rebekah. That's one place where it happened. And it'll happen in your life too. Here we go. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. We could stop there. Paul goes on and has far greater application. But just think about it. It's a practical thing. You say, what do you mean God's going to work everything out according to His purpose and it's going to be for your good? Well, just as an example of that, and we could choose thousands, but let's think about Isaac and his need for a bride. You just saw how unlikely it was, how impossible it was to actually happen. God worked all things together for good. So you see that. So there's an example of it. Practical, hands-on example. Luke chapter 12. Luke 12 and verse 32. Jesus says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Right? Don't be fearful and uncertain about tomorrow and about what's going to happen and about your needs and those kinds of things. I don't have enough to pay this bill or that bill, or I've got this friend and this thing's happened to them. I don't know what's going on. I'm suffering from this or that. Like, don't worry. Fear not, little flock. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Give me an example of that. Here was Abraham. He's worried about his son. Here's Isaac, wondering who he's going to marry. And how does the servant describe it? God did not forsake showing steadfast love to Abraham. He continued right on through. And whatever the next thing was that was an issue, God showed Himself again, full of steadfast love. There it is. Fear not, little flock. It's your Father's good desire or good pleasure to give you the kingdom. What a thing. And then lastly, Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13. Paul had been in prison here, and the Philippians, who he was writing to, had sent provisions to him to help him. And he writes to them, "I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I'm speaking of being in need," and here it is, "for I have learned in whatever situation I am, to be content. I know how to be brought low." You could say, "I now know how to be brought low, and I now know how to abound. In any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need, and I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." And there it is. Whether he has abundance, or whether he has need, whether he has plenty or hunger, he's learned the secret He's learned this secret. Well, what is the secret? Well, of course, he doesn't tell us. You think, but you read between the lines, it's very clear. He doesn't come out and spell it out. Verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. The secret is just a restful confidence in God to uphold him. And coupled with the fact that God is a God who does uphold him, who does show this steadfast love, who does continue to provide, who doesn't forsake him. The secret is I just lean on God and he upholds me. And I've learned, the reality is I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can endure anything, however difficult it is that God would put me through, because God will strengthen me. And I've learned that, he says. I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Because he has God. Because God will be with him and won't forsake him. Because God is kind to him. So, again, just this application. We can, we must, entrust ourselves to the good care and the good plan of God for us. Let me point this out too. It's not just that the thing Isaac feared didn't come upon him the way he feared it would, that he would not find a bride, or this thing was going to just abort. That was a fear. You might say, well, if he was provided a wife, and then it would work out. It's not just that he avoided the thing he feared the way that he feared it, but God provided for him in ways he didn't even expect. Like Rebekah was more than he could have asked for, more than he could have imagined he could have found in a bride. And it's this way for us too. Like when God doesn't just kind of minimally meet or deliver you from your fears. Like he brings you into abundance. You will say at the end of whatever thing you're dealing with or you're fearful about now, at the end of this thing, you will say, he didn't just kind of get me through. God has provided abundantly, more than I could ask or think. You can say by conviction that by things in your past, and also you should be able to look hopefully, that is with hope in your future, and say, in Christ, all the promises of God are yes. He's provided. This is the way it is. This is the way God is. So this is the lesson of this chapter. It's not just a story about an ancient custom and how brides were given away or something like this. This is not what this is about. It's about God's good provision for Isaac and his steadfast love to Abraham and the way that he used the servant to bring it about. Let us draw the lessons that are here for us. Well, are there questions or comments? Anyone have anything they'd like to bring up and discuss?